I suppose we should start at the beginning. You're going to be seeing a number of videos, and they have a beginning, and this is how it starts. Um, Gabriel Cicale was married to Elizabeth Cicale in Naples, Italy. Gabriel was born somewhere around 1870. You can imagine that's a long way back, not far after the Civil War. But that's what it was. Anyway, they came to America somewhere around the end of the 19th century. There were two children born in Italy, the oldest daughter and the oldest son. They moved to 117th Street and Pleasant Avenue, which would be considered Harlem. What you think of New York today was not what it was back at the turn of the 20th century. So, with that in mind, let's think about Pete's upbringing and what he was acclimated to. He was one of 9 brothers and sisters. He had 4 brothers, 5 sisters. He was the first child born in America, Peter, born in 1905. You got to think about, again, New York City then. Here's a little boy born into tenement housing, one of eventually 9 brothers and sisters, as I said earlier. Streets were, again, not paved, cobblestoned, and no cars, so to speak of. It was barren. No electricity, but very, very primitive. No air conditioning, no washers, dryers, any of that. Take that all out of your mind and try to get yourself back to the beginning of that 20th century and Pete's beginning of his life. Hard one. Tough. You didn't know better. It was what it was. The home or the tenement or apartment, whatever you want to call it, that they had was 3-4 bedroom, kitchen, parlor, living room, maybe a bathroom. The stove that they cooked on was basically in a center, if you can imagine this, like a chimney, so to speak, came up like an apex, like a pyramid, with naturally a large round hole where a grate would be placed on top and you'd cook food. Coal would be underneath to ignite the flames and so on, wood and coal. That's what they had. And that's what she cooked on, Elizabeth. Primitive. But that's what it was. Pete's life was like any other child. Played on the streets. Went to school up till 7th grade. Then, of course, the work took over and he was told he was responsible for his brothers and sisters' livelihood and his mom and dad. So that we get into later in his other series speaking about that. So you have to think about that period. Pretty mundane, kind of barren. Pete played with the neighborhood guys, gals, went to a local school, whatever little schoolhouse in the area, and did the best. Played with marbles. In those days, they had a circle, and they would pitch, they called marbles. And you would hold the marble in your thumb and your index finger and, I guess, flip it toward the center of the ring where there were marbles, and if you moved them, certain points were given. If you didn't hit it, certain points were taken away. And these were some of the games that they played, tag along with hopscotch. Not like we have today, huh? That was Pete's life. He was content with it. Wagons roamed the streets. We had the Hudson River Dayliner that was on the Hudson River that took people north, if they can afford it, to Poughkeepsie. And that was for the extravagant. Those were driven by coal. The original was back in, believe it or not, was a steamship. Back in 1807, they were brought into existence. So there were horse-drawn carriages, people walking on the dirt street, cobblestone streets, possibly a tavern, speakeasy, whatever you want to call it, a saloon, where they would go and get themselves a few beer or whiskey or whatever. Possible entertainment might be in there. Who knows, an accordion player or fiddle player. There were burlesque shows, Ziegfeld Follies, high-stepping dancers, again, if you can afford it. There was an opera for the rich or the people that were in a position to afford it. So life, again, was not much for Pete. So you had to really amuse yourself. And I guess that's what he did. He amused himself in the street, helped his mother in the house as best he could when he was little, up to the age where he had to go to work, was told to go to work at age 8, which we'll get into later. And when they came home to eat together, they took that fireplace that was a stove. Once it burned out, they put, like, let's imagine a door or a 4x8 sheet of plywood, so to speak. That would become their table. They'd set it on top with chairs around it, and the mother would serve them food. Think about it. You couldn't, huh? Because the only thing you could think about is what you got today. It's very difficult to think about what they had back then. You're almost talking about back to the pioneers and wagon trains and robber barons and all of that. That's basically the period that Pete kind of grew up in, pre-Depression. New York was not even a stamp as to what it is today. It started in the southern part of New York, the Village area, Lower Broadway, and eventually made its points way up north. But it took time. The Dakota, as an example, when it was built, was called a Dakota for the simple reason that they felt that that building was all by itself. And being all by itself, it was like the United States. There was nobody out there in South Dakota, North Dakota. So they called it the Dakota. That's how it got its name. A building that is very beautiful and renowned for many famous people, and also tragedy for others, such as John Lennon. But that's what New York was at the turn of the 20th century. A pretty mundane, skyscrapers, none. Possible building 5-story, 4-story, 2-story, 6-story would be immense. That was it. Entertainment was minimal. And that was his life. I don't know. You got to ask yourself, what would you do if it was you in that situation? But evidently, he never complained. He made friends, which again we'll get into later, and he went on. He did the best he could. He enjoyed himself, went to school, played his games, helped his mom around the house. And that was his life at the beginning stages until he went to work at 8 years old. I just thought you'd like to have a little bit of a background as to how it all came about, the origination of Gabriel, the father, with the mother married in Italy and Naples and coming to the country the end of the 20th century. And then 7 of the 9 being born in this country. What again is now Harlem, 117th Street and Pleasant Avenue, as I said. And that became their residence, a tenement. He didn't know why, he didn't know better, he just did. If there's interest in what I've started to say, there's a book out called Pete Cicale. It's about his life from its beginning, humble, and we take it through to his later years. I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you will as much as I enjoy presenting it to you. Thank you for listening.